Imagine the assembly line of the Lockheed Martin facility in Fort Worth, Texas. It is a cathedral of modern aerospace engineering. This is the birthplace of the F-35 Lightning II, the most lethal, highly networked, and technologically exquisite fifth-generation stealth fighter ever conceived by the human mind. The fuselage is a masterpiece of radar-absorbent geometry. The Pratt & Whitney F-135 engine is a marvel of thermodynamic thrust. The software code numbers in the tens of millions of lines. It is the undisputed apex predator of the sky. But imagine the factory floor suddenly falling silent. The assembly line grinds to a halt. The aerospace engineers, the software developers, and the Pentagon procurement officers are paralyzed. They have not run out of steel. They have not run out of aluminum. They have not run out of funding. They have run out of dirt. Specifically, they have run out of a highly processed, incredibly obscure formulation of neodymium and praseodymium, rare earth elements required to forge the specialized permanent magnets that drive the aircraft's electrical power systems, its advanced radar arrays, and its flight control actuators. Without roughly 920 pounds of these incredibly specific rare earth materials, the $100 million stealth fighter is nothing more than an immensely expensive, highly classified paperweight. For the last 20 years, if the United States wanted to build an F-35, a Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine, or a precision-guided Tomahawk cruise missile, it had to rely on a terrifying, geopolitically suicidal supply chain. The raw ore might have been mined in California or Africa, but it was almost invariably shipped to the People's Republic of China to be refined, separated, and forged into military-grade alloys and magnets. The Chinese Communist Party did not just possess a monopoly, they possessed a chokehold over the very elements that allow the Western Alliance to fight, communicate, and survive. In the event of a high-intensity kinetic conflict in the Indo-Pacific, Beijing wouldn't need to bomb the Lockheed Martin factory in Texas. They wouldn't need to sink American supply ships. They would simply need to issue a one-page bureaucratic decree from the Ministry of Commerce, banning the export of refined rare earths, gallium, and antimony to the West. The arsenal of democracy would starve to death in a matter of months. The strategic planners in Washington, D.C. realized they were trapped in an unwinnable, mathematically fatal paradigm. They desperately needed a massive, secure, sovereign, and highly industrialized partner to break the monopoly. They needed a nation possessing vast, untapped geological wealth, coupled with the political will to do the heavy, toxic, and expensive work of refining it. They looked across the Pacific Ocean. They looked at the vast, sun-scorched expanse of the Australian continent. And in early 2026, Australia answered the call, dropping a $1.2 billion macroeconomic weapon onto the global chessboard. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are executing a forensic, deep-dive tactical analysis into the most fundamental, foundational, and ruthlessly effective theater of modern great power competition, the periodic table war. Here is the thesis for this episode. In the 21st century, wars are not won solely by the nation that designs the best microchip. Wars are won by the nation that controls the sovereign supply of the minerals required to print that microchip. You cannot dominate the stratosphere if you do not control the dirt. If you are beginning to understand why the true balance of global power is not decided by diplomatic summits, but by the relentless, unsentimental mathematics of metallurgy, chemical processing, and supply chain warfare, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We strip away the political spin and the illusion of free market globalization to bring you the cold, kinetic realities of how the free world actually builds, sustains, and survives. Your support ensures we can keep delivering this level of uncompromising strategic analysis. For decades, the Australian economic model was famously, almost comically simple. Dig it up and ship it out. Australia was the world's quarry. We dug up iron ore, coal, and raw lithium, loaded it onto massive bulk carrier ships, and sent it to Asia to be processed. We traded our geological sovereignty for a quick, massive cash injection. The $1.2 billion critical mineral strategic reserve, officially operationalized in 2026, marks the violent, permanent death of the dig and ship era. We are going to break down the antimony and gallium trap, exposing the terrifying reality of exactly which obscure elements keep the Western war machine running, and how Australia is securing them. We are going to analyze the mine-to-magnet strategy, how Australia is aggressively funding the heavy, toxic industrial infrastructure to break China's refining monopoly. We will explore the Pentagon's lifeline, why the United States has legally integrated the Australian outback into its own Defense Production Act. And finally, we will look at the geopolitical quarry, how Australia is weaponizing its geology to become the indispensable forge of the free world. Let us begin by looking at the specific, highly classified chemistry of modern warfare, and why a shortage of a metal you have barely heard of could lose World War III. The anatomy of a crisis. To truly appreciate the sheer, civilization-altering magnitude of the $1.2 billion critical mineral strategic reserve established by the Australian government, you must first strip away the broad, vague terminology of supply chains, and look at the microscopic, chemical reality of modern weapon systems. The public understands that a military requires steel for ships, aluminum for aircraft, and lead for bullets. But the warfare of the 2020s is not defined by traditional metallurgy. It is defined by electromagnetic spectrum dominance, hypersonic aerodynamics, and autonomous artificial intelligence. These capabilities do not rely on steel. They rely on a highly specific, heavily monopolized subset of the periodic table. For 30 years, Beijing executed a masterclass in strategic, state-subsidized capitalism. They recognized long before the West that whoever controlled the refining of these niche elements would ultimately control the future of high-technology warfare. They intentionally overproduced, dumped cheap refined minerals onto the global market, and ruthlessly drove Western mining and refining companies into bankruptcy. Once they secured the monopoly, they began to squeeze. In late 2023 and 2024, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce fired the first warning shots of the tech war. They imposed strict export controls on gallium and germanium. In late 2024, they added antimony to the restricted list. The Pentagon panicked. These were not random trade disputes. These were highly calculated, surgical strikes targeting the absolute core of the American military-industrial complex. Let us break down the specific traps that Beijing attempted to set, and why the Australian Strategic Reserve is the ultimate countermeasure. The gallium chokehold. Consider gallium. It is a soft, silvery metal that is virtually non-existent in its pure form in nature, primarily extracted as a byproduct of processing bauxite into aluminum. Why does a superpower care about a bauxite byproduct? Because of gallium nitride, gone. In the realm of modern radar technology, gallium nitride is the holy grail. The older generation of radar systems utilized gallium arsenide, but GaN technology represents a monumental leap in capability. GaN semiconductors can operate at significantly higher voltages, tolerate vastly higher temperatures, and handle immensely higher power densities. What does this mean on the kinetic battlefield? It means that a radar array utilizing GaN transmit/receive modules can see further, track smaller, stealthier targets, and burn through enemy electronic jamming with devastating power. The AN/APG-81 Active Electronically Scanned Array (ASA) radar on the F-35 Lightning II relies on this technology. The AN/SPY-6 Air and Missile Defense Radar, which is being retrofitted onto the U.S. Navy's Arleigh Burke-class destroyers to detect hypersonic glide vehicles, relies entirely on gallium nitride. The Patriot missile defense batteries guarding the skies over Eastern Europe and the Middle East rely on it. When China, which controlled roughly 80% to 90% of the world's primary gallium production, restricted exports, they were essentially threatening to blind the entire Western alliance. If you cannot source gallium, you cannot build AESA radars. If you cannot build AESA radars, your multi-billion-dollar destroyers and stealth fighters are blind, deaf, and dead in the water. The antimony arsenal. If gallium is the eyes of the military, antimony is the raw, kinetic fist. Antimony is a brittle, flaky, silver-white metalloid. To the civilian world, it is occasionally used as a flame retardant in plastics and textiles. But to a military logistician, it is the unsung, absolute prerequisite for fighting a high-intensity war. Antimony is a critical hardening agent. When alloyed with lead, it significantly increases the hardness and mechanical strength of the metal. Without antimony, the millions of rounds of small arms ammunition, the armor-piercing cores of heavy machine gun rounds, and the tungsten carbide penetrators used to shatter enemy armor simply cannot be manufactured to military specifications. Furthermore, antimony is heavily utilized in the production of precision optics. It is a critical component in the manufacturing of the infrared sensors and night vision goggles that grant Western infantry and special operations forces their legendary advantage of owning the night. It is even used in the production of the explosive primers that ignite artillery shells and precision-guided rockets. China accounted for nearly half of the world's mined antimony, and an even larger percentage of its refined processing. The United States, terrifyingly, had virtually zero domestic antimony mining capacity. When Beijing placed export controls on antimony, they were not just threatening the tech sector. They were threatening to stop the production of the very bullets, artillery primers and night vision optics required to sustain the US Marines and the Australian Army in a protracted Pacific conflict. The Australian counterstrike. This is the exact, terrifying threat matrix that the $1.2 billion critical minerals strategic reserve was designed to annihilate. The Australian government looked at the Chinese export controls and recognized them as acts of asymmetric economic warfare. They realized that Australia possessed massive, untapped geological reserves of both antimony and the bauxite required for gallium extraction, alongside world-leading deposits of lithium, cobalt, and rare earths. But having the dirt in the ground is useless during a crisis. The strategic reserve is not a passive stockpile. It is an aggressive market-making weapon. The Australian government, utilizing the $1.2 billion fund, acts as the buyer of last resort. They provide massive, guaranteed offtake agreements to Australian mining companies. They sign contracts guaranteeing that if a sovereign Australian company digs up antimony or extracts gallium, the government will buy it, stockpile it, and hold it securely for the defense industrial base of the Anglosphere. By utilizing the power of the state to guarantee the market, Australia completely insulates its domestic mining sector from Chinese price dumping and market manipulation. They guarantee that the mines stay open, the extraction continues, and the strategic stockpiles of the free world remain full, regardless of what the Ministry of Commerce in Beijing decrees. Australia looked at the antimony and gallium trap, and simply built a bridge over it. The dirty reality of the supply chain. Securing the raw ore through the strategic reserve is a monumental achievement, but it is only 10% of the battle. The greatest strategic vulnerability of the West over the last 30 years was not a lack of dirt. It was an absolute, cowardly refusal to process that dirt. Let us focus on rare earth elements, REs. The 17 elements at the bottom of the periodic table, including neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. These are the elements required to manufacture the incredibly powerful permanent magnets that drive the electric motors of autonomous drones, the guidance fins of Tomahawk cruise missiles, and the ultra-quiet electric propulsion systems of the new SS AUKUS nuclear submarines. Australia has always had rare earths. The Mount Weld mine in Western Australia, operated by Lynas Rare Earths, is one of the highest-grade rare earth deposits on the planet. For years, the Western model was to mine the ore at Mount Weld, crush it into a concentrate and then load it onto a ship. Because the West had implemented incredibly strict environmental and industrial regulations, and because China was heavily subsidizing its own refining industry, it was simply cheaper and easier to let China do the dirty work. And it is dirty work. Refining rare earths is a brutal, heavy industrial and chemically hazardous process. It involves massive cracking and leaching facilities. You have to take the raw ore and bake it in massive rotary kilns at hundreds of degrees with highly concentrated sulfuric acid. You then put it through incredibly complex, multi-stage solvent extraction processes to separate the elements from each other and from the naturally occurring radioactive materials, like thorium and uranium, that are often found in the same ore bodies. The West outsourced this toxic, expensive, and environmentally challenging process to China. We traded our strategic sovereignty for clean hands and cheap magnets. By the mid-2020s, China controlled over 85% of the world's rare earth refining capacity, and over 90% of the manufacturing capacity for the final permanent magnets. If the United States wanted to build a nuclear submarine, the ore was mined in Australia, shipped to China to be bathed in acid, turned into a magnet in a Chinese factory, and then sold back to the Pentagon. It was a strategic suicide loop. The $5 billion fortress of heavy industry. The true genius of Australia's 2026 Masterplan is the violent termination of this suicide loop. The $1.2 billion strategic reserve is the shield, but the $5 billion critical minerals facility is the sword. The Australian government realized that they could no longer just dig and ship. They had to rebuild the heavy, dirty, industrial capacity to crack, leach, separate, and forge these elements entirely on sovereign Australian soil. Through the massive capital injections of the Critical Minerals Facility, acting via Export Finance Australia and the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility, NAIF, the government heavily subsidized the construction of massive, state-of-the-art refining complexes across the continent. Look at Kalgoorlie in Western Australia. Here, Lynas constructed a massive, multi-hundred-million-dollar rare earths processing facility. Instead of shipping the raw concentrate to Asia, the toxic cracking and leaching process is now handled domestically. The radioactive byproducts are safely managed and stored under strict Australian regulatory frameworks. Look at the Eneabba refinery project in Western Australia, operated by Iluka Resources, which received a massive billion-dollar loan from the government to build a fully integrated rare earths refinery capable of producing separated neodymium and praseodymium, NdPr, oxides. This is the mine-to-magnet strategy. Australia is building a completely sovereign, vertically integrated and blockade-proof supply chain. They are mining the ore in the Pilbara and the goldfields. They are cracking it with acid in Kalgoorlie. They are separating it into pure oxides in Eneabba. And through advanced manufacturing partnerships, they are establishing the capability to forge those oxides directly into military-grade permanent magnets. The West has finally accepted that national survival requires getting its hands dirty again. We are accepting the environmental and financial costs of heavy industry because the alternative is to be held hostage by a hostile superpower. By building these multi-billion-dollar refineries, Australia is permanently breaking the Chinese monopoly. They are proving that the Anglosphere possesses the capital, the engineering brilliance, and the sheer political willpower to rebuild the industrial foundation of the 20th century, optimized for the technological wars of the 21st. The death of the deputy sheriff. To fully comprehend the geopolitical shockwave caused by Australia's industrial awakening, we must look at how it has fundamentally altered the power dynamic between Canberra and Washington, D.C. For decades, the relationship between the United States and Australia was frequently characterized by a somewhat patronizing framework. The US was the undisputed global hegemon, the provider of the security umbrella, and the designer of the exquisite military hardware. Australia was the loyal deputy sheriff, the enthusiastic junior partner that bought American fighter jets and happily deployed its troops to assist in American wars in the Middle East. The critical minerals crisis of the 2020s inverted that relationship completely. When the Pentagon audited its supply chains for the B-21 Raider stealth bomber, the Hypersonic Attack Cruise Missile, HACM, and the Virginia-class nuclear submarines, they stared into an industrial abyss. They realized that the United States simply did not possess the domestic geology to supply its own military. You cannot magically conjure antimony and rare earths out of the ground in Ohio if they are not there. The United States military, the most expensive, technologically supreme fighting force in the history of human civilization, was entirely dependent on the goodwill of its primary strategic adversary to build its weapons. Washington desperately needed a lifeline, and Australia held the rope. Title III in the sovereign integration. The realization of this vulnerability led to one of the most significant, precedent-shattering legal and economic integrations in the history of the Western Alliance. In a massive, sweeping legislative move, the United States Congress and the Department of Defense officially designated Australia as a domestic source under Title III of the U.S. Defense Production Act, DPA. This is a legal earthquake. The Defense Production Act is a Cold War-era law designed to ensure that the U.S. industrial base can produce the materials necessary for national defense. By designating Australia as a domestic source, the U.S. government effectively erased the border between the two nations regarding defense supply chains. It means that the Pentagon can directly invest hundreds of millions of American taxpayer dollars straight into Australian mining companies and Australian refining facilities. It means that an antimony mine in New South Wales or a rare earths refinery in Western Australia is treated with the exact same strategic priority and receives the exact same federal funding support as a munitions factory in Texas. This legal integration was further cemented by the AUKUS Pillar 2 agreements, which explicitly mandate the seamless sharing of advanced technologies and supply chains between the US, the UK, and Australia. This is no longer a relationship between a superpower and a junior partner. It is a relationship of absolute, mutual, and desperate codependence. The United States provides the massive capital, the advanced research and development, and the nuclear propulsion technology. But Australia provides the physical, elemental bedrock that makes it all possible. If Washington wants to build a swarm of autonomous drone wingmen to overwhelm Chinese air defenses in the Taiwan Strait, they must pick up the phone and secure the gallium and neodymium from Canberra. If the U.S. Army wants to manufacture the millions of armor-piercing rounds required for a protracted land war, they must secure the antimony from the Australian outback. Australia has transformed itself from a consumer of security into the indispensable heavy industrial forge of the free world. We are not just buying the weapons anymore, we are controlling the very ingredients required to build them. We hold the keys to the periodic table, and by extension we hold the keys to the arsenal of democracy. The weaponization of the earth. The $1.2 billion critical minerals strategic reserve, and the sprawling $5 billion heavy industrial complexes it supports, represent the final, definitive death of the end-of-history illusion. For 30 years, the political and corporate elites of the West believed that global trade was a pacifying force. They believed that if we outsourced our heavy manufacturing and our raw material processing to authoritarian regimes, the invisible hand of the free market would guarantee peace and prosperity. They believed that economics had transcended geopolitics. The Chinese Communist Party never believed that illusion. They viewed trade, supply chains, and mineral processing as exactly what they are: weapons of war deployed without firing a single shot. They spent 3 decades quietly, methodically cornering the market on the elements of the 21st century, waiting for the perfect moment to pull the trigger and starve the West into submission. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They pushed too hard, too fast, and they woke the sleeping giant of the Southern Hemisphere. Australia possesses a geographic and geological advantage that is mathematically insurmountable. We have the dirt. But more importantly, we have finally recovered the political will and the industrial courage to process it, refine it, and weaponize it. The $1.2 billion reserve is not an economic subsidy. It is a declaration of sovereign independence. By guaranteeing the market for Australian miners, by pouring billions into sovereign cracking and leaching facilities, and by legally integrating our outback into the United States Defense Production Act, Australia has executed a masterstroke of grand strategy. We have completely bypassed the adversary's greatest weapon. We have ensured that the Chinese refining monopoly is permanently, irrevocably broken. When the strategic planners in Beijing look at their maps today, they realize that their export controls are useless. They cannot starve the American F-35 assembly lines, because the rare earths are flowing safely from Mount Weld to Kalgoorlie to Texas. They cannot blind the Western radar networks, because the gallium is being secured and processed by Australian sovereign entities. The era of dig and ship is over. The era of the geopolitical quarry has begun. Australia is no longer content to just provide the raw materials for other nations' empires. We are securing the bedrock of our own. We are ensuring that the free world controls the chemistry of lethality, and that the arsenal of the Anglosphere will never, ever run dry. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you believe that Australia's $1.2 billion investment is enough to permanently break the Chinese monopoly on critical minerals? Or is the West still dangerously exposed to supply chain warfare? Let us know your tactical assessment in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay sovereign, and we'll see you in the next one.